Yay. Okay, I got your chat up. Doot. Is we visible? Who knows? But I am Seamless. Hello, hi, I'm Seamless. I'm here today with DNB Academy doing a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm actually pretty pumped about today because up here in this direction, is a track that when we work through, it's going to take us so long to work through because so many things are in it. I'm glad. Are my levels good? We're gonna begin by playing the track. I'm gonna play you through up to pretty much here, which is about to where the track is real right now. There's stuff after this, but it's pretty well theoretical, and we will discuss it to talk about some of the things that this track contains, along with looking at all the regular mixing and mastering and that kind of thing. There's a bunch of really cool, nifty sound design stuff, as you might expect. But also, this track is good old, 5 years old. So we're going to be talking about resurrecting dead projects, because that's what this one is. Anyway, here comes the track. Doot. This track is this old because basically this part was too good to let die. I was so very into this that I had to work as hard as I could to make sure that there was something viable around it. And that was pretty well the key difficulty of this track. Excuse me. Anyway, let's work through a little chronologically how this worked out. And I'm going to do this kind of creationally chronologically how it began, because originally this track had a tempo change in it. That was going to be how I handled where to go, because this beat sounds pretty good pretty much at a lot of tempos. I'm not going to change it because there's lots of time stretch stuff and it would get all messed up, but the main element in this thing, this bass, when I describe what this is as a sound design element, it's going to sound like it's way too simple to be doing what it's doing. As it turns out, though, this is pretty much like the maximum advantage something like additives synthesis can apply to something like a driving pluck. This pretty basic kind of old school drum and bass concept of just sequencing really fast at 16th notes at 174 BPM at F sharp. Well, actually F, I'm down a beat, but the point is what about this is so special? Why is it so gripping? Why is it literally grabbing you and forcing you to keep it there? And it has to do with just how our brains understand what detail is. Like, the reason, like, you can see how there's this phase randomness going on. I'm actually going to make a new harmor. I'm going to skip right to this because this is honestly the core reason of why everything about this track exists. Like, we're going to, because then the rest of everything else after this honestly was pretty new. I did some pretty, like, I used my string synthesis on some citruses, and that was not something I knew how to do 5 years ago. But this kind of thing was pretty something I was just starting to get to understand. Down more. Cool. So, classic problem. If you just play a line and play a bunch of notes together, it's not gonna do the thing you need it to do. Let's just go to a new thing. Do. Don't need to name it anything. And I cloned you somewhere. Where'd you go? There you are. Oops. There you go. Neat. So let's just play it. So this is just the line. I already made it low enough. So it's already kind of a problem just being the way that it is, just playing the line in a row like that. It doesn't really work. And the pretty basic quick thing to do is just to enable phase randomness. And this solves a lot of kind of pretty basic round robin problems, like sort of as you would a sampler if you just play the same sample a bunch of times in a row. But if you have the same recording just a different bunch of times, it sounds more natural. But we're not trying to make the sound natural. This isn't a natural sound. What is it about natural that even matters in this context? And it's just that the real world has created by the universe and not us has a depth of detail that's essentially infinite, which satisfies any amount of just like how far do we want to care about something. And the idea behind like how well like a piano pluck kind of sounds good versus something that has enough randomness to it that sounds good is related about a little low compared to music. My bad. Let me turn me up. Do. Up. It's loud now. Honestly, I thought I was too loud. Okay. So, yeah, this is actually kind of a loud sound, ain't it? It's being compressed, even though the master compression is still on. Anyway, yeah, so randomness. Real world stuff is random, not so much because it literally is a kind of random that we're trying to like digitize, but because normally it's lightning can't strike twice. It's just too dense. So we want to create a kind of denseness that's similar. So the first step, this phase randomness is okay. Does a pretty good job. But when we do a kind of normal pluck to things, this doesn't stick. It's still very synthy kind of vibe. The rest of it is applying amount of some kind of unison. I'm saying some kind because really what did it was applying an amount of randomness here in the phase calculation. So this is a very like extravagant version of it where we can hear the phase difference being that kind of random. Now let's go to the other guy and see why it's not doing that. Because its phase difference is so very closely calculated to be very tightly close to itself that it doesn't do that particular effect, but you can still tell it's doing it. So let's go play back that original pattern again. And it gets there by being accentuated by distorted, but also that there's two of them doing two different kinds of random, two different depths of it. And this is now getting into like 4 or 5 dimensions of like regularity. That is the kind of density that is normally associated with realistic stuff like just banging sticks together. It's kind of a weird comparison to make, but that's the depth to which we're trying to make this work. And the reason why it works is because like the phase profile is different and random, but it doesn't really go back. It doesn't go back to a regular return as though it were sampled. It's not just 6 regularly repeating things that create a sort of oscillation that you were used to. It just keeps being different, but not too far away from the normal kind of rigid average that it creates the grip. And what the grip is that normally what I just said, the sort of expected oscillation of what's different is basically literally that. Even if it's random, you get a space. You get into a space of what you kind of expect. But if that space just keeps going, it's like the brain's version of a DC offset. And you can feel that. Like, tell me you're not feeling that. It kind of feels like uncomfortable a little bit, doesn't it? That like we feel the beginning of a pattern go somewhere that doesn't seem to have an end. It doesn't seem to come back ever. And I only really knew as much to explain what I just said to you kind of very recently. Didn't totally know why that was true when I made this, and so didn't actually get how to use it, how to kind of move forward with this track. So now that we have, let's talk about what's actually in the track. So from the very actual beginning. Hear that cello-y contrabass sounding thing? That was what I was talking about before, about my string synthesis. Because that's what that is. It's all high-passed and affected and whatnot. Routed into another dude. Yeah, it is. Good old Valhalla room. Perfect reverb for everything. Have three of them, essentially trying to be a contrabass, a cello, and a very high string. The higher it goes, the harder time I have making it sound real. So that's why they're very, very low. They get in there, they're barely audible, but they're there near the end of the intro. Like, that's the impact that they have on things. They are individually synthesizers, though. This is what I've been having the most fun with recently, is figuring this out. So, the core of doing a string with FM and RM, because that's also part of it, is utilizing Citrus's ability to move a thing in phase. Now, here's something that I didn't just put together until very recently. You might notice an effect. Let's again do this on a fresh one because I don't want to mess with the one I got. The effect of moving phase creates the effect of changing pitch. So if I just link phase to a next modulator, that's smooth. Did I just link pitch to it? I totally did. I'm a smart person. It's like, wow, that's a little bit more than usual. Okay, there we go. Good job, tabs. All right. Yeah, all right. That subtle pitch motion is what happens when you move phase while the thing is playing. It's basically the Doppler effect. As I keep saying that, I keep linking it to the Doppler effect. But here's kind of a weirdness. There's not anything different between changing pitch and changing phase. And this is super important because some plugins don't give you a direct phase handle to manipulate. Most of them do now, like Serum does, Vital does, Phaseplant does, but the kind of old guard stuff like Massive and FM8 don't. But because the phase change is just pitch change, you can still do this by just literally selectively chiming your pitch change. If I were to actually have something on it, I'm using number 2. Dupe. It's basically doing a DJ's job. You're beat matching waveforms, and that's what phase change is. It's phase change, and this is important because the main aspect of doing the string thing is to change a phase of the effect you're modulating. So, for example, what I like to do is to do big old saw things, and then do the additive business. So lots of plugins can do this now. This is actually not even like a Citrus with like unified thing now. You get your saw waves into this additive form, and then you randomize the phases. This is basically what we were doing with Harmor, like as a thing. But now it's just one static, one of those things, one of those random choices. Harmor basically does that process I just did every time you hit a note. And that's why it's like that. But this can just be, you can pick one, then there it is. And then you get another one going. And in my mind, modeling this is essentially modeling there's a string and then there's a bow. And then their interaction is a little related. So now I changed this thing's pitch, and because it's doing that, it's essentially describing a constant phase change. And that's why it sounds like that. It sounds like a bow. Now, the effect of, now you gotta start caring about the physics, right? Like you're using the bow and you're pushing the thing, and really good string players, I'm doing it backwards. Really good string players can do a thing where they can intonate their note while they're hitting it, and it's important because if you don't, you're stretching the string, and it's gonna change the note. But sometimes when you're going really, really hard, you can't really not do that. So that's a kind of like intensity effect of the string, of the instrument. So part of it, other than like modulating the on by, in this case, we're doing ring modulation, and FM also is a really big impact. That's why I'm doing very little of it. But you get the effect on, and you get your modulation modulating. Oops, I'm on. That's just on. But I do want it there anyway. Actually, that's a good point. Let's not complicate things. Volume of 1, volume of 2. But we do need to modulate input 2. There we go. Now, the enveloping is an obvious kind of like cool. That makes it sound more realistic. But there's actually a very specific shape we have to make. And it's the difference between the most kinds of strings. And it's this kind of like this business. Same deal with... Now, if you also put this on phase of the modulator... Hear that kind of doing it for a second? Yeah, well, actually, let's put it back where it was. So we can do this. And then that, too, doesn't have a mod. Doesn't need to do anything. There you go. So it started to do it. Another problem we're running into is that kind of janky noise you're hearing, and that's a crap ton of aliasing. What aliasing is what happens when you generate frequencies that are higher than Nyquist. And what Nyquist is half of your sample rate, because that's the highest frequency that can be generated inside the math of what digital synthesis is of your sample rate. So it doesn't mean that the frequencies go away when you do that, when you actually, because it's not hard to generate high frequencies. A saw wave is just asking for it, and the answer is it gets wrapped around. As high as it would have gone above Nyquist, it comes back down below Nyquist. It sometimes sounds okay and fun and cool, because sometimes it's just part of the sound you're doing, you don't even know it's happening, but you do notice it's happening because it's not harmonic. It's never harmonic. It's never the right numbers. And that means that it makes it, like, the honest-to-God difference between analog stuff and digital stuff is this exact quality. And digitally, the version of the solution is to use oversampling, which makes it run individually, the plugin, at higher sample rates so that it can do some work on those frequencies so that when it comes out of the plugin, they're not there, and or at least not as high or hard, and thus not doing the effect as much. Super important when you're doing high notes. And that's why this song has a pretty high like CPU tax. It's because these things, like doing as much modulation as they're doing. Oh, hey, it's not even doing this one. Oh, yeah, because it's the low one. Low ones can deal with it because, like, honestly, this is why I didn't even notice problem was a problem for so long. Because if I just focus on bass synthesis, the field of what is harmonic is so large and therefore so correct that what aliasing applies is not just negligible. But when you're doing high frequency stuff, very, very high, like just any kind of piano, like that becomes a problem pretty quick. And I learned that by doing any kind of hardware synthesis and discovering, wow, hardware just doesn't do that. It's not to say that you can't set stuff up to actually do this. It's just that you need to know sort of the application in the moment to choose. Yeah, see, this one's doing a little bit. And I also have the rendering all the way up because honestly, this isn't enough. But yeah, those sounds, after they're made though, that original synthesis kind of is the beginning. After that, I'm basically doing like a cabinet sim, but on a body of a violin. Because back to our modeling concept, the idea there is that we just figured out the bow and the strings contact. When there's a sound being made, that's what we're doing there. And then now we're going to vibrate a body, like a string, or violin. And that's essentially it's just a description of size and tone. And in this case, like, that's that. And it kind of sounds like someone's slapping a big guitar in a space, right? That's what we want, kind of. The rest of these guys have very specific stuff trying to make it work into their tones. Actually, this one, now that I'm looking at it, this was not even... Oh, yeah, here you go. This one was me being real special about it. Trying to really come up with a body of more normal-sounding things. And only kinds of worked. Eventually, I even tried synthesizing ones. And that's beyond when I got here. And the reason why we're not using those is because they didn't get better. And... honestly, this one, the kind of cello experience you see happening here is as good as it's been so far. And that's about what the application works for it, is just these kinds of backgroundy things for now. Why not? So that's the majority of those dudes in the beginning. And the rest of it is this lead thing. Now, the lead thing was in the original do. Like, I had this lead going on from this part of the song, which I'm going to play. Let's hope it's balanced right. I'm going to warn you this time, though. I'm playing in 3, 2, 1. And I muted everything. Cool. I'm playing in 3, 2, 1. That was something else I really wanted to save by this track, is how much like a race car that sounds. That wasn't something that I'm totally like prepared for. And even the note I am choosing to be in right now is essentially all about how much like a race car that thing sounds. Because higher and lower pitches don't necessarily make it work. So let's talk about what it is. Because it sounds like it's actually a pretty basic thing, but let's listen to it by itself because it is a little bit much. Where are you? This dude? Yeah, 41. Where are you at? There you go. Doesn't that kind of sound like the bass is layered in there? And a little bit of weird what's going on is that sound can't exist the clean way. It has to be destroyed in such a way that it fits in with the regularity of the beat. Music's a bit too loud. Okay. Turning down the music. I'm gonna turn it down when I can find the output. I scrolled over. I don't know why I did that. And I do the hokey pokey and I turn the level down. That's what it's all about. Cool. Yeah. Hope that worked. Anyway, moral of the story is it's not so much that it, like, because the typical sort of solution to this thing is you high pass it, you fit it, you get sidechain going on, but this is being sidechained with everything else, but only with the kick and the snare. If I really, really want to do that route, I could sidechain it to the bass's rhythm, not so much the actual literal bass signal. But the the output here being its own version of the destruction and then layering that on there makes it so that how broken it is sounds intentional and adds. It is not merely like just another, there's just not more, another thing with another hole in it. Fitting the thing, it's now an extra dimension of that detail we're talking about before that like natural is usually sought after for, and it's actually something that's different and separate and then doesn't interfere with the weirdness that the other bass was doing. And that's again another description of why this is working and not so much why I did this on purpose. But knowing that, what I did was I spent a lot of time in the intro automating, actually not that one, this one, automating these dudes, which is, so here's how I did this originally. Like I just had this is just an automation port on an EQ that I just put in the playlist. This track is really old. It's so old that my drums are Superior Drummer. Oh, look at that. It doesn't even know where the libraries are, but the Superior Drummer 2 rather. I'm layering these with synthesized citruses for kicks and snares, and we'll get there. But there's a lot of older choices that I don't make now that I had to kind of live with. One of them is doing modulation like this, but a way you can, because the problem is like I want to automate, this, but you can do that by, going there and automating it. Boop. That's what these are, minute max, and that's what these doohickeys are. Yay. This how to deal with the lead. Yeah, so a lot of these weren't there though. They were doing their own automation before, but now in the intro I had to actually make it like introduce, and sometimes it even goes negative a few times. You hear the whip kind of happening. That's essentially this action, but the min-maxing getting around itself in such a way that it makes it go the other way, which was actually a recent accident. And that's how you do these things. That's how you kind of make them work, is you make them be accidents, and then you just kind of go, oh, and then you keep what works. You keep it really hard, and you kind of move on with other stuff. Yeah. Another fun element was this element, and Similar Life. This is a dude that has just a kind of big, just a ding. I think I called him ding. Yep. I think this was me trying really hard to synthesize a cymbal. I'm guessing because I haven't gotten anything that like harmonically complicated out of a harmor in a long time. And like, look at that. I am synthesizing something. What is this? This is a voice? Oh, it is. Yeah, it's one of the Laurie Webb samples from in here. Yeah. Where you at? one of those. And I'm screwing with it somehow to make it sound like that. Neat. I barely know what I did with it. I'm barely even talking about it because the creating atmosphere and things like that is honestly all about that. Find the source, stretch it, and put reverb on it. And then the other part of it is to do the timing. Same sound. And again, with one of these particular doohickeys on it, with a balance. And so a balance is just another volume automator that's just on the end of it. It's not even all the way on, it's halfway on. I think I'm automating its output level. Yep, there it is. Or no, that's something else too. I have high passing and low passing automating those. That's a great trick, by the way, for intros, and not even intros, just in between stuff. Like all of your instruments essentially are loaded with built-in transitional methodology, like EQs, high passes and low passes. You have to high pass and low pass most things, so you might as well get artistic with it, right? It's just there. It's just one method to fill stuff. And when we're just talking about, I'm not trying to make this look like, to make a good cake, you just have to you have to put as much crap in it as possible. But the best cakes are the ones that have the most stuff in it, arranged the coolest way, right? It just gets harder and harder to have more and more things. And then you gotta get weirder and weirder about it. Like, make all your cakes in different places and ship them from different countries and assemble them in some kind of laboratory. But, metaphors, right? Anyway, this layer cake came together by way of just trying to make the theme work, and the theme, the only thing that lived through the 5 years of changes was the drive. Like, that's just what this track is, and there's no shame in that, really. Like, I'm not, like, I liked the tempo change idea because I was into really complicated things. And here comes the part where we talk about how to resurrect dead projects. So once we get there, though, we have this first part. This is actually something that was still in the project. Let's listen to this again. Let's listen to this again, because this actually used to be just how the song started. Like, in silence, totally. I'm bad at this. Oh yeah, and that sound, you're probably interested. This was one of the first times I got Serum to do cool stuff. Serum was kind of new back then. And I was just kind of getting used to the funner things about the fact that you could do neat with really basic aspects of it. Because the rest of this is pretty normal me stuff. Like, there's a vocoding, and I had this gross beat on for dat noisier tear. And what I was really trying to do, and considering this is 174 day and people here are really in the drum and bass, you're probably quite familiar with the kind of the old school that pretty well personifies. And sort of that's what I wanted to do with that, but I had no idea how to get out of there into something that wasn't this. And this has happened to me before, but like Bass Antics, if you're familiar with this track, electro track I had made, where the second half, what I had done was I took one isolated element. This little crawl that is happening used to just be a fill. That's all this was. I was like, I don't know what to go with this, and like my answer to Bass Antics was to take one sound that was only one time there and make it the core of the next thing. And that's what I did. I made the core of the next thing. The problem is that it turned it into like a progressive track. Like, it turned it into this like trip. Like, it can't get out of it now because of the grip, because of that. Like, I basically trapped myself in this like journey, and now that's what this track is. So this is for me, this is weird because I had to reconcile some stuff. The regular track structures is pretty approachable and normal, and I'm a little trying to kind of still do it. It's gonna go back, it's gonna come back, but really this track doesn't have to do that. Functionally speaking, this track could just go away. It could just go to somewhere else entirely. Because, to me, music is for something. Like, all the best times I've liked the most music has been scores for things in video games used particularly well in movies, fight scenes, that kind of thing, right? Like, my introduction to everything cool about drum and bass began when I understood what breakbeat was because of a Samurai Jack episode and The Matrix. And that, like, is because it was used like that. It was used, it had a thing behind it, right? And to that end, my idea of just arrangement is based on that. It's based not on a individually, I'm just listening to this song concept, but like, it's got to go somewhere. It's got to tell a story. And it's not, I'm not even trying, you just have to notice about yourself if that's what you're writing about, because if you're not doing that, but you're making a track that has to be that, you're going to have a bad time. And the bad time was I couldn't do anything with it for 5 years because I kept trying to normalize it. I kept trying to be like, no, this is going to be a track. Some DJs are going to like it. And like, even though I have a tempo change in it, yeah, that was going to go over well. That's just, it's the future. We can have drum and bass be that now. It doesn't have to be, limited to whatever. And that was me limiting myself. And the second I stopped thinking about it like that, entirely because someone on YouTube, when I put up the demo of this on YouTube, someone was just like, oh, the sounds are cool, but the arrangement is so weird. And I wasn't taken aback by like, oh no, my arrangement is weird. Because I thought I knew that, but I didn't think it was that weird. I was just kind of like, well, no, this actually feels very normal to me. And I realized, oh shit, I'm not actually doing something normal. I'm the abnormal one. And what? And then I, figured it out. Moral of the story is you can make better solutions to your targets if you know what your targets are. And making this work is now turning into this idea of there's this cinematic presentation to it, which is entirely where I managed to finally make an intro that got from somewhere to not just starting there. Excuse me. I've never really had a problem with just starting on the energy, obviously, but I also like it when it doesn't, when there's a build up, when there's tension. And then you got to start thinking about themes and motifs. I don't know if there's a difference between the two. I know that there is a difference. I just don't know what it is. But I'm bringing them up because the theme of this song, again, this. And that's why I compared this writing wise and arrangement conceptually to Noisiest track Dust Up, because it has this similar kind of industrial vibe of we're setting this scape, we're setting a stage, there's a scene building. They're so good at that. They're they build scenes. No wonder I wanna. And that idea now is that what's going to happen, that there's this big drive and and now when I start answering these questions, all of a sudden none of the choices are hard. None of the ideas of what I should be doing or how things should be feeling or how they should be going are any kind of confusing. That's the whole reason I'm bringing that up, because once you just pick stuff, you're not so much lost in what could be, because what you can be is freaking infinity. And unless you can represent that, not necessarily saying don't try, but unless you can, maybe don't. That's gonna, more or less how this track happened, because I was trying to make it kind of just be a lot of stuff. And it worked out a lot better to be more focused on what the drive is. And so now stuff now where the string go, where this fill goes, how it's happening, and maybe even how this transition will work, have answers. I'm very happy about that. So let's talk about how the bed was built. Because all of this was built on, I had to create the universe that I'm playing in, the drums and stuff. Let's talk about it. I likened this to being a band in a garage a lot, because that was the thing I did. Basements, but, one garage. The thought, though, is even bands that write stuff by being in a room and jamming together essentially are building a platform upon which to jam so that they can. They're doing that because they're not necessarily familiar enough with what's possible or what they want to do that they could just write a note down and then go play it. So they get in the room, feel what they got, and then go, okay, yeah, now what? So beginning a lot of times making this stuff is you have to start by building the thing that you're on the bed for, so that you can even be what am I going to write on? And that's the drums. I'm a huge, big fan of Superior Drummer and in all of its incarnations. Tune Track is the name of the company that makes this, and I will sing their praises endlessly. I was doing metal for a long time before I did drum and bass, so this was just every universe I've ever been in. But it is, of course, designed to be an acoustic library. That's its benefit in life. What sets it apart from other drum libraries is that it has way too many microphones and it allows bleed. I'm not even using most of them, but the whole point is that it's super duper good at being ridiculously realistic, up to and including the problems that real drums have. And this is kind of important because if you're going for a vibe, and a lot of drum and bass, there's actually a vibe that we're all going for that sometimes we forget about because it's just so big and baked in that we don't notice. And that vibe is 70s funk. And it's all about the breakbeats, right? And that's a type of broken, terrible standard recording based on what we can do now. but it's a vibe and it's a feeling, and we don't want to violate it. Like, we make power, but the power has to respect the relationship to each other, to itself, that adds up to essentially being what that was. And to do that, you got to combine really, really real things with really, really fake things, and making the power, like, constraints between them translate in a way that adds up to that, what I was just saying. And that's that, like, getting in a room and jam vibe. You just got to put stuff down and make it up. That was a word. I'm sure that was a technical term. You got to make it up until it is something that you could then notice that can be things. Like a sculptor. Like, you're basically, it's like, you're going to sculpt stuff, but you have to make your own rock. Wow. That would be hard. So let's make the rock. The way that I like to use Superior Drummer, it has a lot of internal tools, and sometimes I use them, but they even use any here. Yeah, I put an EQ. Wow, transient morpher on what? Yeah, on the top dynamic mic. That's kind of a strange concept, but I set these to, actually, this one is just not the one. Am I not doing any of that with this? Oh, I skipped it entirely because I was a smart person once. Nope, didn't do that with this. So this is actually the main one, I guess. So that one was actually just the fill Superior Drummer. This one is the main guy. Yeah, there he is. So he has some amount of power, and just it's carved out because what's coming out of it is enough room for that other stuff to fit in. And I have a synthesized kick and synthesized, two different synthesized snare. One of them is the one that goes on that one, and the other one is the one that goes on the fill one. But like I was saying, the way I like to use Superior Drummer is to have it come out all multiple outputs, so then I can just mix and match it the way I want to actually inside FL. And the majority of how that happens is a lot of the stuff that's not the main power gets high passed and then shunted into some reverb and then into a master Maximus, and then everything else is the kick and the snare that has the power and is the thing doing the shunting. And these dudes, synthesizing them, this is the snare fundamental. It's not changing pitch because I'm setting it by hertz value and not the ratio. That's in Citrus. There's a difference between the two. This is the one that cares about note values and will change. This is one of the big, actually, it's kind of a strange tangent. This is one of the big revolutions of digital FM synthesis, was that this is possible. You can change the pitch of a thing and play another note and have the harmonic relationship actually translate, because it's not a lot of that's actually linear. And that made it so, but yeah, moral of the story is that we're just not doing that, and we're making it one set actual hertz value. And the idea behind this is that it's a big shoop, little teensy, really loud transient, and also a big, really fast, like, pitch sweep. And it makes that happen. Yay! I have been told that people like what's happening. I'm very glad. I like helping. Yeah. Cool. Now, and then, okay, I actually was kind of around for a bit of the last Q&A from the previous dude, Let's Synthesize. And he was talking about tuning, how sometimes that matters for snares. And, like, it does matter. And that real specific number that I chose there was not out of nothing. And it wasn't really math either. Using my ear. I was just letting it go and just kind of... And chances are whatever value you pick is going to be relative to some amount of harmonic. Either because it is harmonic and it sounds good, or it's not harmonic and it sounds good. Moral of the story is it's not always about it being harmonic. That is about it being good. It is still, but the fact that it's not being harmonic is still you making the choice to put it outside of a thing, which is another one of those dimensional changes, because doing two things twice is not doing four things. Anyway, next one up, the kick. This one has actual pitch value, but this was actually based on a real, me trying really hard to synthesize an actual real kick, and then I turned off everything about it that made it sound real. I only have the sub reinforcement and a little bit of the tippy tappy that adds up together. Let's see what it sounds like if I actually turn all of it on with this mix. Yeah, a little extreme. The noise is a little, yeah, but without all the compression, it actually sounds kind of like a real kick. And I was actually modeling it after a Superior Drummer kick. Yeah, you might be wondering why you even do that if I'm modeling after a kick I have a sample of. And it's because of stuff like this, when you want essentially to be in control. Now, actually, this is a really good example of why we should talk about layering. Oh boy. And because this track doesn't even do a lot of it, and it's working out, but only because of an astonishing amount of work. It is a lot easier and better to layer stuff. And it has nothing to do with the ability to make more complicated things. It has everything to do with whatever it is that thing you made adds up to. Later, when you want to change stuff about it, you can, without changing other things about it. without having like someone was also in the last video was talking about like how do you get good at neurosound design. And neurosound design is all about wrangling the dimensions. It's about putting Reese's on Reese's on Reese's and having like 6 dimensions of some amount of change and actually having it be legible. And that comes from really like grabbing and like holding in real specific ways. Like you're flying a kite and you're making these really tiny, like important adjustments. And like, that's your whole life. That's what the sound design is. And that's fine. It's awesome. Like I love doing that. But a lot of the other way more like melodically stable stuff is about, and the reason it's so stable in mixed well is because it's broken off into such fine granular bits. Like the sub is a thing, obviously. Then there's this mid-range thing. Then every element that's in harmonic noise is separated completely from the elements that are harmonic, so you can EQ them all and be different separately. Like has nothing to do with actually designing the sound itself to be better. It's allowing you to have more power to mix it later. And a big way, that's a bit like why this still works out so well here, because technically I've done that. Like the superior drummer is broken out into lots of bits. And I broke it down in even more bits by separating them into individual fundamentals and having them be powerful and like mixed up. And the level choices are all real weird because the way I do these is I have my master stuff on kind of the whole time. And I'm doing the bed stuff and I'm doing the jam stuff and I'm literally just feeling how it feels and then making all of my choices with it on. And this can be dangerous. This is actually things that a lot of not even older engineers recommend you never do, because you lose perspective really fast on what loudness is. Because you like, it's not even about you just like you hear loud things. It's just that you get used to like a real thinness of dynamic range, and then you start trying to work within it, and then your whole idea of whatever. So you can really only do that if you have really good references, and you're matching them extremely close, or you've done it enough times that you're just familiar with certain like results and like that kind of junk. But basically referencing constantly. Excuse me. Talking a lot of rope. Anyway, yeah, listen to the car stuff too. That was good. That's really eternal advice. But when you do get that kind of power, what you can do is you put it on, and this is kind of just like listening through your universe, or like drawing a picture with a filter on, and you making the color choices based on that filter to arrive at the color that you actually want. This would sound dumb as hell without the mastering. In fact, let's listen to what this sounds like without the mastering. I'm actually curious now. Probably gonna clip. Be ready for that, y'all. Here it comes. Oh boy, with all these choices, this is just... real loud and weird. That like those are all really important choices that added up to being a really good idea, but I was not there at this level hearing this making those choices. I was hearing this making those choices. So what is this? Because before we even talk about the choices, we gotta talk about like why they mattered into this. This is a combined multiband compressor, master limiter, master saturator. What this is doing, it's breaking it up into 3 bands, which I'm not even doing any compression on. This is mostly the most valuable thing I'm getting out of this is the mid-side splitting. It is just a mid-side fader on each of these bands, and I'm spreading mid and high just a little bit, and I'm just on the lows, which are very low. This is honestly a safety, because to be perfectly honest, if I've done my mix right, there shouldn't be anything down there generating anything. That's not perfectly exactly what it should be. But other than that, like that's not super important, because again, that vibe, the 70s vibe, the squish of imperfectly jamming your junk into something not powerful enough to handle what you're doing, and that means damage, and that means saturation. And we don't have to do any of this. Like, I could make a really stupendously clean version of this that doesn't have any of the artifacts that this is generating, but it would sound lame. It just wouldn't rock. That's all there is to that. And like, I even use that word, and that's another era of stuff that was defined by its ability to be too powerful for its recording medium. Like, that's why everything about that is cool to me. So to make this work, what we have to do is understand a little bit about what distortion is relative to compression. This is some kind of magic. So if you're familiar with Maximus, you probably are used to this interface and how neat it is, but have you ever noticed that this is pretty similar to what the wave shaper looks like and does? And more, like, ultimately, yeah, this little quadrant right here essentially is the wave shaper. The difference here is that this understands that it's going to get signals that are above 0 dB because of that 32-bit floating point processing Mr. Less Synthesize talked about. And that means that it can handle the signal above there, but when you engage the saturation, as you would if you put on the wave shaper, it clips it at 0 dB, as though it were the limit. I mean, we're going to make it do that anyway. Ultimately, it's not as though I'm just going to let it clip. Like, this opening up the compression is just saying that this has a little bit of a ratio to it as opposed to being a limiter. And then the rest of the actual is being decapitated by the saturation. And isn't it neat that I use that word, decapitated? There's actually a piece of hardware, and I think a plugin called the Decapitator, that his whole life is doing this. Because regular actual analog compressors have a particular weakness, which is that they can't perfectly limit. They are not, like, digital compressors can do that because digital compressors, slow down, Seamless. Digital compressors can react to the samples, and that means that essentially, for what we understand that to mean, it's instant. But for physical things, it can do really fine adjustments to stuff really fast, but just not terribly perfectly instant, which means that there's always going to be just a little bit of a little jank coming up. And so they develop these pieces of hardware that are just saturator units that just have a cut, and they cut, they're clipping. That's their job, whole job in life. And because of that aliasing stuff I mentioned before, the reason why that's all very valuable in the hardware space is because distortion is one of those high frequency generating things that creates a problem for aliasing. And if you're using all the hardware to do that, you just don't have any of that, it sounds really, really good. And a kind of good that makes a lot of really old choices work. Like Noisia used to just clip all their stuff, and it mostly kind of worked because their sources were the material that, when done that to, and done it in the way that they did it with, it sounded good. And that viability got worse and worse the more digital stuff got because of the aliasing problem, if that's what they were using. And so then you had to care more about actually caring about thresholds and stuff. But this is still just a question about speed. Because ultimately we want the thing, like making the thing as loud as you can make it is actually, just here, let me show you what I mean. I'm going to put on full compression for a second, and then I'm just going to turn the compression off entirely. And watch how much louder the not compressed version is. And we'll talk about why, and why I don't just leave it like that. You can see the peaks, by the way. I just want to call attention to how high the drums are over everything else. This is the thing that's saving it. I'm sidechaining stuff, but this is why we can still hear drums. I'm pushing it really hard into the limit, but the actual body of where the most of the song is far below the level of the drums. That's how this works. Anyway, that's what that sounded like. Beep. Here comes this. Oops. Here comes something. Like, ouch. It's like getting punched in the face, like, and you basically are being literally by air punched in the face. And the reason why I don't just leave it like that is because the way that that's performing in my room is not the way that you heard it being translated just now, and there's no way to guarantee how that plays. It's one of those reference problems. If I were to play that in a car, I would learn, but I know that particular issue exists. I've experienced it in numerous ways. The sort of best of both worlds approach is kind of the best way to typically go about that, and it's because the compressor tends to flub up more when you can hear it move. This is a weird part about mastering that you need to know if you want to be really, really good at it, which is that everything we're doing is at a frequency. Even the compressor moves slowly and the distortion moves really fast. They're both doing the same thing. They're both modulating the input at a rate. And the distortion works because it's so fast that you only hear the high frequency sort of, it sounds good to us the way that it does it. But when the compressor warbles, it's because it's too slow. It's because it's so slow that we can hear its impact outside of the content. And it starts to have, that's what that effect is described as. So the kind of sweet spot, like, that's also something about this working, is finding how fast the compression can be before it starts to itself be a type of distortion. It just doesn't gel. And one of the reasons why it does is because of the aliasing issue, but Maximus has a built-in oversampling, which does what it does. Because like I said before, compression can only react to the samples, and the samples are not as dense as you might imagine. They're pretty freaking dense, being, tens of thousands of times per second, but there's still activity in between that. And they can calculate it and you can hear it. It's not as though it flubs it, but the compressor does. So that's why that. It's also why saturation, because the saturation will flub. It'll flub the same set, like the saturation problem, but the timing is what creates the biggest flub. You're basically determining what's your flub range. Flubber. And because I bring this back to trying to be funky, that certain amount of squish is a product of it not being completely perfect. And like I could make it loud and jacky, and some tracks do. You've definitely heard products that do, but they're not the vibe I'm talking about. And that's the only reason why I'm incorporating like compression at all, is because it's the way that it sounds. And then I just find an acceptable version of this. Usually it's a amount of right. This kind of looks like 3 to 1 to 3, 3 to 1, 3 to 1. That's what that is. Yeah. And not a lot else. And the reason there's nothing else up here. There's no other EQ. There's no cutting. Well, actually, there's a low cut built in here too. That's what that does. That's why nothing typically, like, I don't care about my sub being that low. But everything else, all the other major issues that this track has are being handled at the mixing level because I can hear the result directly. Things like, let's even look at what the kick is doing from our sub here. So it's an E first track and nothing. I don't even know why there's an EQ in there. Actually, I know exactly why there's an EQ in there. And I also know why it's this incredibly intangibly tiny point. This is something fun about EQ. Because this is something called minimum phase EQ. You might have heard of linear phase EQ. It's the opposite of what that is. Linear phase does not screw with the phase of your content when you make an EQ change, but regular EQs do. And it's because that's how filters do the work. They create phase change to stuff. And this incredibly tiny, minute adjustment creates an effect that's almost like an incredibly light version of the disperser. I mean, the disperser is like a stupendously hard version of a filter. It's kind of a like, weird joke on their part that they did that, but they like that. It's one of those fun, it's like the neat sound design version of DSP. But on something like the kick that's controlling everything in the song, sidechain sometimes, other times it's just the note, it's just so freaking loud and everything is timed around it, that adjustment might as well be like 10 dB. Like, it really had that much of an impact. And if you have that kind of boomy texture and stuff, like you have a sub that really sounded nice and clean and cool, and you can press all your stuff together, and it still sounds nice and clean and cool, but there's like this little weird hump that showed up in like 200, 500 that you don't really know what to do with, and it's probably because you haven't tried this. I'm probably gonna blow your mind when you do. And it works because of how hard and pushed up everything is together. Like this alone, if this were by itself and there wasn't the mastering, you could not detect that change, probably not unless it was phased against itself. But because it's crushed, your stuff is all magnified in terms of impact. And then the biggest things have the biggest impact, and your freaking floor level. Actually, this is the snare adjustment, and that's the one that was booming. That's kind of the deal there. And like, let's actually look at the kick too, because it's probably got some fun. Yeah, this one had a little bit more fun to it. And 2 parts. One part, you do that there, and then the other part, you do that here. A little unseen benefit of doing the kick yourself is that this like pitch adjustment will have an EQ ramification. Got zoom in further. There you go. All right. So this is like a hertz value it's starting at, and this is the hertz value it's ending at. And then I set like it's just a note, I guess I'm playing it, and I adjusted it up here, like, because 2 is the default setting, so this means I changed the pitch up this way. I changed it up this way too. I don't know. Not being very efficient with my pitch choices 5 years ago, but idea being is that if this curve were curved up, this would be essentially saying that it spends more time in those frequencies. So you would angle your click of your kick higher. This is happening really fast. Like this is actually, like, it zoomed out again, but like this is how fast, like that's how fast it's happening. Where's our tempo adjustment? There it is. So where's a freaking 16th note? There it is. That's a 16th note. That's how fast that is. So this click, like the angling up there is really just like angling like the EQ tonality of your kick. And same, you can have more than one angle and you can do that, but funky thing, when you make those EQ adjustments and you make the little holes in here, you're a little bit doing that. You're a little bit putting a on your kick. This is I showed that tiny adjustment on the snare. A typical advice is to never do this on like a full kick. Like you get a kick sample and it sounds really nice and really cool, nice and snappy. Do not touch it. Like you have probably experienced that it just immediately loses like snap fidelity. This is one of these layering things, because if you had that broken out into like the sub, the mid, the click, the noise, you could like do that without screwing with your click tonality. Or you could actually do that on purpose and mess with it. And it's because of the phase change. You're essentially putting like bumps on the road to it coming down. So instead of it being, it's, but that worked out again, playing everything together, humming it up. You probably heard in this superior drummer, like this guy, that's actually kind of a considerable amount of low energy in something that's not the sub layer. And it's because ultimately this thing's marriage with that other guy is what makes it sound very, very tight. But again, that would probably sound dumb as hell without the actual music. That does not sound dumb as hell. That sounds awesome. Wow. What does it sound like without the master? All right, that's a little stupid. So, all right, without the mastering on and with just this like this, let's talk about why this particular drum relationship turns out to be amazing and how you can make this work on most things. Other than snapping out all your drum into layers, and by all your drum, I mean you're kicking your snare. I have tried to care about toms that hard, and you probably should if you ever want them to be heard with your stuff. But the best fills usually just don't play toms with things. And I understand that that's actually just the solution to the problem I just said. Is maybe people would play toms with stuff if they treated the toms and kicks and snares, but that's so much work. I don't want to do that. So kick and snare, that's enough. And then everything else, literally everything else, can just be selectively high passed, just higher and higher. And as the farther away they are from the energy of your kick and snare, the more room you have to push everything up in loudness. And also, the higher frequency something is, the less power it needs to sound as loud as lower stuff too, which means that if like you're having a power problem in something, you can just shave off energy at the low end without really changing the sound much. Excuse me, am I gonna burp? Nope, okay. So this experience here is me layering a bunch of really light, like look how low all this junk is. Like that sounds and it feels like that you just shouldn't be able to hear that in the mix. Like that doesn't make any sense. But when you do, so there's a real desire when you're making stuff, anything, drums, sounds, and whatever, to make the individual things shine. And it a little bit sounds like when I was talking about the natural detail thing or whatever that you'd want to, that I'm telling you that you need to make all your individual things shine, but that's really not the case. Because again, two things twice is not four things. It needs to be two things and then another two completely different things. So the overlaying and layering of things, the desire is now to find things that aren't doing the jobs that stuff's currently doing in order to solve whatever failure or deficit of something that something's not there. So like, for example, there's the superior drummer stuff, but I also have, oh yeah, these guys. These are just sampled hats. This is hat samples. This is there. And in a lot of drum and bass, there's just incredible depth of drums stuff. There's just layers on layers on layers going down. And none of those individual drum hits were ever designed to be heard as being like, this is what a whole collab sounds like. It's just there to be like, okay, I needed the like power imprint onto this thing to kind of make the do it, whatever. And that's this thing's job. Tremendous job layering together hi-hats and fake hats, real hats, metal stuff like cymbals and whatnot. One of these patterns actually is a little bit like just writing a cymbal a lot. Like this guy. Oh, that's a kick and snare. Where's my cymbals? Not in this pattern. Not in that pattern either. What happened to my... Oh yeah, I'm forgetting how I layered my stuff. There we go. All right, so here's like regular hat land from Superior Drummer. That's the cymbal, but then like I can just kind of make an average cymbals wash a curve. And this is why there's just more cymbals happening pretty much all the time until the end of those fills happen when the cymbals get a little bit louder. And then they just kind of get tossed around in the compression universe created by the stage we've set. And part of that was planned, but only in the sense that I knew that there'd be a sidechain moment time with the kick and the snare. That's it. Like everything else about how that worked out had to be just kind of, again, kite flown into position. Flight coned, sure. Flight cones, was that what I'm thinking about? Wow. Yeah, like every once in a while, a really high-powered like snare or cymbal kind of experience happens to kind of like there's like a wave going and there's like woo, and I only kind of know in what direction stuff's gonna go, and that's what the high passing for. You just kind of setting yourself like a range of acceptability of where stuff can be, and then you just kind of things in there. But you want to be able to see more than enough one thing. So if it's just one thing and then like more of a thing, it's loud, but it's not more thing. So that's why there's like 7 layers of different like hi-hatty nonsense going on, even though you can't individually tell what any of them are doing, because that's the point. And that is again a little bit the result of the funk thing, but not necessarily because the people who were doing funk were trying to do that, but because people took all the breaks and layered them all together, and that made a lot of really dope stuff. So that's how we're trained to do that, to want that as an awesomeness. What time is it? 12 on the dot. Cool. That took a whole hour to get just there. So then the rest of it is the sidechain, and this is the sidechain. I'm doing this with the balance. These days, I don't recommend doing that. The only reason why is because originally I was only doing it in the first place with the Fruity Balance as a plugin, is because I was looking for a plugin that didn't have snap or didn't have smoothing. There we go. And nowadays I like to do it with the limiter, because the limiter is a compressor plugin and everything about it is really, really fast, including the gain articulation, which is what I need, a really, really fast gain articulation. Sometimes though it does create a snap when you're doing that stuff, and especially when you're trying to do something like sidechain your sub. So here's something weird. Here's me sidechaining a sub, and then here's an EQ after the sidechain on a sub coming down to sub range. Should I need to do that if my sub was, say, a sine wave? Let's listen to the sub. Listen, dude, there it is. Boop. All right. So there's a number of solutions to this problem of sidechaining your sub. And again, this is back to that compressor issue of the flubbing. It's possible to go the other way, which is that you can move a thing faster than the thing's oscillating and create distortion in the waveform itself, because you're altering the level within the waveform's oscillation. And the sidechain moving really quick on a kick or a sub that's just really slow oscillation, that's really easy. And all of that extra high frequency action you're seeing is that distortion. That's what a snap is. Now, a snap is just a description of motion. So my couple options are, I can slow down the automation that I'm doing on this. I can smooth it on the source. I can draw a smoother shape on the automation, or I can put an EQ after the fact and prevent it from ever moving any speed higher than sub range. And still have it accurately be timed and respond correctly to sidechaining information at the level of it in the frequency range that I want it to be. This is super important because I do this also on the synths, on the high passing. The high passing comes after the sidechain because it'll still smear it down too. Because if it's slower than the high frequency stuff, then the snap shows up as bassy junk or aliases. I'm not totally sure what's up with that, but same thing. If you actually want the universe to be correctly passed, it needs to be the absolute last thing that happens to your chain. So there's some rule of thumb about loudness. We showed what looking at the compressor looked like in terms of level, that like the kicks and the snares are wildly louder and everything. And there's no number that I'm looking at. Like I'm not looking for like there's 6 minus dB whatever for kick and this much more for snare. It's entirely by ear, but also by eye. Right here I have my sidechain for everything. And then I also have the sidechain for the sub. And this is essentially describing what like the non-drums information is. And then all you guys are looking up to this dude. Yeah. Hey, that's only the master. That's kind of weird. But either way, this represents the sort of maximum loudness of the drums. And I'm literally just eyeballing to see that this is peaking lower than that. Because look how freaking loud that is. Like that's going in here and then, yeah. So this means a couple things. One thing, it means that I have a lot of room to push this. If I wanted it to be louder, I could. But what I like about it is how far away it is, so that the flub is a kind of like displacement effect on the entire track to get there. How far away and how hard it has to try to get from where it is to where it is together just sounds cool. That's the root of all. It sounds cool. Technically speaking, if we were to break this down the way that previous ages of engineering would tell you to do it, like you would get to this description of a mix the way that I've done it before you ever touch anything with compression, just because you happen to know all the stuff I just said out loud before you made the song. That you knew that you were going to make it this loud and be this far away from stuff, and that it would just feel this way. And that just seems impossible to know that, doesn't it? But that's only because we do weird random stuff every time we do a song. If we were responding to session musicians we used forever in a genre that never changed, you'd be able to do that. You'd be able to do so much more than that. You would be able to do everything I just said while I said it. Like that was like that's how a lot of those like Grammy Award winning engineers kind of live. You know, their genre and their track per track kind of progression is not it's professionally linear. You know what I mean? And within that range, you can have that kind of power. But if you're just kind of flinging stuff around and seeing what works, that sort of pre-attention is not valuable, because you're going to get inspired by something in the middle of it all and be like, well, I want to change everything. And that's what you want, because that's how you get new things. If you're trying to get new things, doesn't work if you're trying to do new stuff is all. So don't get too cramped up about like fitting into like the plan, if especially you're literally deliberately attempting to find a new one. It could be fun either way, you know, if you're trying to see if you can do a thing in a way like a thing. Like I've seen people do older genres, or newer genres rather, with older instruments and in older eras of recording, like doing metalcore with 1920s gear. That's kind of fun. And as a thought experiment, that's a lot of fun, but I am personally not a fan of getting wrapped up in rules if I cannot perceive an immediate value in terms of it making it sound better. Like I would do the whole like care about the -6 whatever if that particular plan netted me the results that I wanted. And if it does you, then go for it. Like it's all that's about. That's all that's about. This particular plan allows me to kind of create a kind of average like cone of effect of a thing that I can then just a bunch of stuff and then I can kind of be like, oh, that's awesome, and I can track down into the way of things. That's just the way I like to work. And it's also why I barely ever put out music, because it's not terribly productive. It's not terribly great at like being a professional anything, other than being a professional guy that talks about how to do anything. So that's why that works for me. Other than that, let's see what else was important about this track. The string stuff, I'm real happy about that, but that's just like I just shoehorned that in from things I was doing. There's honestly like way cooler Superior Drummer 3 stuff I could be doing, but this track again is very old. And Superior Drummer 2 is still very good though. Like I love all of that. I have to make more fills. So yeah, let's talk about finishing this track, because that's sort of like the resurrection part. So the issue was starting from here, going to here, and ever coming back. Because this I can't even tell anymore, because not only do I not have perspective on things like how this track sounds, but it's been in my head for years. That's a little bit much. So that means to me, this is just what an intro sounds like. I've made that happen now. So how do I come back from that is essentially I took the intro's like arrangement and kind of planted it over another like extension of the main beat here, and then it just kind of switches over. Right now, the transition sucks because there is none. But this is like arrangement wise how this is supposed to work. Let me show you. Let's actually just start from right here. Essentially this again. And I was doing that again. Like I'm not mad about that necessarily. Like some amount of more interesting stuff needs to be happening kind of in there to sort of sell interest in it. But that's like structurally wise, the kind of gravity sense, like it works. Plus, it does just kind of go back to being, which I will just, it's astounding how not tired I get of that. And that, like, it's ridiculously valuable as a line. I can't even, like, this is why I'm trying so hard to save this track. Like, I have barely ever been able to do anything like that on purpose. So, like, working hard to solve this is basically so I can save it. It's like there's someone you love dug in a cave. Like, you're gonna dig through that cave, damn it. Like, that's what's happening right now. That's this track. On top of it all, so what do I do about, like, trying to get it to, like, what do I know how loud is too loud? Because I just described a world where I could make it louder, right? And other than the fact that I want to add more content to this track, so I don't, basically I want to put new stuff in the second half so that there's something else happening. That used to be the tempo change, but I'm not doing that. So that meant, like, that's the new plan. But how do I know how loud is too loud? And the answer is I compare it to whatever I can conceive of being, like, relative, like, references. But how do you pick a reference? So you would think it's just cool, find, like, a thing in the genre you're doing, or cool, find a track that, like, you like that does a thing. But that's a bit difficult, especially if you're dealing with stuff that's new, especially if you even have an inkling on perhaps maybe even doing something better, or even that there can be something better. This is a scary thought, but the way you need to do that is you got to find the closest relative of the thing, and you probably aren't going to find one. Like, I can find a lot of examples of tracks that sound like this in arrangement, but not in power. I can find a lot of tracks that sound like this in power, but not anything like this in arrangement. And that is a problem because that means I have no reference for what either of these things sound like that's good. So I have no way to know what damage is. And this all comes back to the funk consideration. The whole reason I even care about that is because of this entire discussion. Like, because then we have to start splitting apart our idea of good into component parts of, like, well, a song isn't just one thing. It's made of a bunch of stuff that adds up together to being a thing. What about the stuff is good? And what about it is what you're trying to get out of what you got? And that's never going to be the same thing for more than one song. Like, you're going to eventually and essentially find a bunch of songs that do the thing you're thinking of. And then you have to, this is sort of the hard part because you have to normalize them. You have to figure out how to listen to them the way that transmits what you want out of them correctly. Because you can't just trust YouTube or Spotify or SoundCloud or even your own computer to serve you correct levels when they say they are. You have to put them in the same environment, look at them, and compare them. And that, then the job starts being, all right, well, you want this sort of 70s breaksy vibe. But what is the vibe? Is the vibe literally how low and level it is right now the way it is, or is it relative to the content and the stuff that it's in? And if that's the case, if we're going to put that in a song that has this other song's amount of power, how loud is that in this range of power there? Where is this example? Where is that example in relative to that amount of power? And the answer might be that there is one, but not necessarily through that exact content, because now you got to break apart, well, what's the vibe and the beat there to that relative level that even makes it sound the way that's like that, and then start finding, so you basically molecularize it until you can find as many individual relationships into other songs as you can in a way that you can then relativize to each other so that you understand the power relationship. And that's what it all comes down to. Everything is level. Everything is just a waveform oscillation, and another thing being another thing is an oscillation at another level. Because if it's the same thing, it's not two things twice. That means that the difference between, like, a saw wave and a piano is entirely about a relationship and level, in a very complicated harmonic sense. But trying to figure out, like, it's like the piano's harmonic power relative to the fundamental is why it sounds like that. Because if I just, like, took the math reality of that and just printed it on something, it doesn't work. Not unless the power relationship is similar. And because it's not about just the harmonic relationship, it's the power relationship. So the hard work is boiling down for yourself the definition of what good power is in everything you understand music to be. Like, this is stupidly hard work, and it's basically not something a lot of artists do on purpose. It's a thing that they've just done, and it's one of the reasons why they have the power they do. Because when someone tells them to go do a thing, they have all the references ready to go. Or at least they know how to find them. They know how to look for it. Like a really talented VFX artist knows the kind of quality of noise that are certain things in certain ways about physical reality itself, so that when someone comes and asks them to do a thing, they know how to, like, piece it together in a way that kind of works out. for reasons that apply to references that may or may not exist. Like doing CG work sometimes is recreating stuff, other times is what happens if. So what happens if I take a 70s funk band, put on modern power considerations with modern production ability, because we can take things so much farther than any engineer from that era ever conceived of. Like, if they had the power we do, would they do the same thing? No, hell no, of course not. But that would also mean that we wouldn't have the material that inspired us to do the thing that we did, would it? Hard to think about it, but I love it. I love working down all those weird little historical traps into things, because eventually when you come back out of it, you start thinking to yourself, okay, I have to merge these two things, but they can't. There's too much. The world's not big enough for the both of them. So what you end up doing, like you're about to do a hand trick here, like you can't make that work. So you got to figure out like the drawing of the outside of the sphere so that you can hook it onto the other part of it so that it looks like they're both there, but they're not. Well, the part of it is carved out explicitly so that the other guy can fit in it. You see this a lot with differences in how one approaches like orchestra and metal combinations or metal and EDM combinations. You could very easily tell sometimes if it was a metal song with EDM stuff in it, or if it was an EDM song with metal stuff in it. Huge difference in the approach. It's very much what power gets saved, what relationship gets saved, and it's about what about either part did you even want? And because there's a lot of parts, right? Not all compatible. A lot about what metal is because of like how low tuned it is and how there's not any kind of bass power, so you can't do things like run super hard subs into stuff. So sounds that have super hard subs outclass all the metal power, and you can't just switch between them. It doesn't sound right. So you got to do all these weird little compromises to make the choice, and that's just everything for all things, for all the stuff. Because eventually you discover that there is no such thing as a perfect genre. There is no one genre. Every genre is built up of a bunch of stuff beneath it, and if your job is to do a thing again, you want to know what the stuff is. And it only gets more complicated when you combine more and more genres, but that's the fun thing. That's the fun deal. Especially fast genres and making things out of slow stuff, which is a lot about what drum and bass was, speeding up the breaks and finding a new dimension in it. And that was a lot. That's a lot of fun with that. All right, how much time we got left? Like 15-ish minutes until the open Q&A. Let's see what else inspiring to talk about this song. Let's look at the main Philly thing over here, because that's probably about as much time it takes to talk about it. This is sounding good. Yeah, this one's better. Okay, so I did a blur effect. What I did was there's just this sound. I recorded that into Edison and then used the blur effect to generate this sound. You see doing the up into it. You do that. Do I still have Edison open anywhere? I don't. Well, let's do a new one. You do that by putting whatever sample. And I wonder if it'll do it automatically. We'll find out. So then you click on the blur icon, which puts on a monitor. It's not mine. And then you get this graph looking thing. And this point in the center represents kind of where the original audio is at any given moment. And then if I do this, this is saying I'm going to do reverb before it. So like... And because the sample is so small, it does the blur, but it doesn't create new information before it. So what you want to do is insert silence, which is somewhere in here. There it is. Boop. And I put it over there, but that's okay because I can just Control X. Control... What the fuck? Control X. Oh, fine. If you're going to be that way. Control X. Aha. Cool. Now you do it again. There you go. And you can see it have done it when you hit the go button. And then I just kind of put it in here with the crossfade engaged here. This, like, I barely ever use this declicking mode, but that's what this like visual is. That's handy. Get us that like. Love it. So as far as the actual sound goes, wait, nope, you. Is there another layer? Oh yeah, I guess I must have used a modulator. I'm recording a modulator. Am I using a real one? Nope, I'm just using like what looks like just a naked harmor. It's kind of interesting. Maybe it's just the sub. That's probably what that is. Yeah, so that that's what it sounds like without any of the motion. And in the song with the motion, well, I probably just have a macro going on. Yep, there's my macro, and he's moving a bunch of junk. So this is the height of the bunch of junk era of sound design, when lots of fun tutorials for Massive and Serum were just about let's link a bunch of stuff together, and it's because it's just the universe of fun and modulating all your things, and it becomes really easy to find your cone, right? You end up getting your cone of perhaps acceptable ability. And then this automation cloud used to just be one thing, and I made a bunch of copies of it, and I made minor tiny adjustments in my kite flying so that like it comes out to being slightly different, like as though it's some crazy cool variation, but it's really kind of the same thing a lot, but so complicated that you can't tell. And that's just a lot of wrangling and specifying frequencies and then compressing the junk out of it so that it like comes up and stays loud no matter what at the source, and then it gets distorted and compressed and coded more. Vocoded. Am I doing anything crazy? I am. So Vocodex is, in my opinion, the absolute best vocoder that exists. I genuinely have not heard of a newer, better one. It is tremendously complicated, though. Its primary deal in life, and right now I'm not using any modulator, so it's its own modulator is what's happening, and it breaks Vocodex down into being a really sort of dense-ass phaser by way of a lot of band passes. And that vaguely talky kind of percussive nature, that kind of dispersy feel is, if you were to look at the result of the dispersal like in EQ, you would see a bunch of little striations in the spectrum. And this is what these filters are just doing directly. And that's why it sounds like that. Getting it to work and being good is a lot of just moving the big parameters around and trying to not move them in a way that makes it sound bad. And you do that just by parameter. You move them, you make the automations, you just burp, burp, burp over and over again. And every time you hear them go a bad way, you move it somewhere else. And you do that enough times, enough rhythm, and you get to learn where the tolerances are and how to solve certain things. Like this is the band gain multiplier window, which just is how loud is this band, and I turn them all off, and I have low pass coming in to low, have that work out in the band width window. So look at the playback. That's what like the experience of using Vocodex is like, and it's all about the relationship about those bands. But those bands are not completely perfectly together. They sound the way when they do, kind of like a weird carnival. You've probably heard that sound before. And that kind of overglass effect. Oh, I'm not automating this parameter. Yeah, that kind of overly glassy effect is like kind of weird to me. But then you get the like too fat era, so that you get your sweet spot, or you automate it. And then there's this, which also changes the bandwidth per band. And that's what makes Vocodex the best, is that all the stuff it does, it lets you then do per band. It's like the additive version of vocoding. Vocoding, yeah. So for example, this window, the pitch shift, this is hilarious because the way a vocoder works is that it takes the input and it takes another input, and then the thing is essentially like a peak follower in the spectrum. So if your thing is higher or lower pitch, it moves its effect up and down the spectrum. Or you can just move the pitch knob, which just moves the effect up and down the spectrum. Or you can just move the individual band's effect up and down the spectrum. Not the same as moving the bands. It doesn't move the bands. It moves where the effect applies itself onto what band. That's what this is. And it can do some funky things. But the other one, this guy, does move the bands. This thing changes the actual generation position of the bands. And it's by default a line. But when you make a curve like this, it removes the rigidity, like linear shapeliness of it. A thing sounds organy when it is linear to notes. When you get an octave response out of it, it kind of gets that like octave, 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 and it sounds like an organ. But when a thing is sharp and like saw wavy, it's not linear. It's getting denser and denser as it gets higher, like a saw wave's distribution of harmonics. And this lets you kind of, you can move this right there is what that shape would be, because it's saying like not a whole lot in the low end, and it's just more and more and more and more. This is a weird graph to kind of visually get used to, but you can detect the difference when you play with it. And it helps to control for like how this thing turns a lot of stuff into kind of sounding like a carnival mess. You can change the nature of the carnival by altering the nature of the distribution of the flutes. and his attack and release time. And those guys have their own bands too, and I'm not even messing with them. But you can change the attack and release value per band. So if certain bands sound stupid because they're there too long, you can make them be lower without making the ones that sound also because they're there too long be there too long. Straight up, have not ever seen the vocoder this good. Just full on. I would love it if someone could point me in the direction of one. And oh yeah, and then it even has unison. I'm not using it, but it has unison, and it does exactly what that sounds like. It puts another one of these and alters the pitch position, and it like works. It's beautiful. But really CPU intensive, more work, more bands. And I'm using a computer from 2016. Yeah, so we're about to start the Q&A. I don't mind getting a 5-minute head start there, but we can, I'm sure there's questions on about this. I talked about a lot of stuff, didn't I? Woo! And, I have been talking to Andre here, putting on this whole thing. DNB Academy on 174 day, which honestly, coolest thing. I was like a really neat deal. That's a deal. I'm pretty pleased. Oh, fun fact. Do you know why 174 is a common BPM for drum and bass? Did I ever talk about this? It's been so long since I started talking about this. I literally have forgotten if I'm talking about this. Long story short, 174 is the only whole number BPM that works out to a note value. And that note value is either F or F sharp. Either way, hanging around there means that your bass frequencies oscillate zero crossing at your beats, which makes it really easy to mix really loud stuff, which is super important before we had all of the side chaining and super mixing and mastering capabilities. Excuse me while I cough myself. Woo, Q&As. Okay. Thinking about XLN Addictive Drums 2. Have I tried it compared to Superior Drummer 2? Better for natural sounding drums for DNB. So it depends on how far you want to go. Superior Drummer is basically a drum DAW. It does so many things. It has windows in it, and it's just ridiculous. If you want drums, Superior Drummer is like the absolute pinnacle, but you probably don't need the pinnacle. I've gotten a lot done just out of contacts stuff. Like, that works fine. I've also, regular samples, like, you can just find, it's not that bad. It's not that bad deal to not have to, like, use crazy sample libraries like that. I use crazy sample libraries like that when I want to do stuff like recreate an era of drum recording, or to sound as human as possible, which is usually, like, beyond a range of acceptability for, like, timing and things. But, yeah, most other kinds of drum samplers are probably just fine. How long have I been producing? I began when I was 6, I put on a fake weather report with a song that I recorded with a tape cassette player that I learned on the piano that day. It's like the first song I had learned ever. Does that count as producing? I really wanted to make songs for stuff, but no, I didn't touch FL Studio until like 2004. So that long. Does VCX work in Ableton Vocodex? I think so. If you're on the PC, there's a VST of it. The Windows VSTs for all of the FL stuff, mostly. Do I care about clicks on my ducking? I do, which is why I put the side chaining before the end capping, EQ, high passing, low passing on the sub stuff. I'm very humane on this aspect. What I suggest, keep up training, increase motivation, inspiration to create good music and good storytelling. I'm all about doing like the guerrilla stuff, like invent yourself a fake band, come up with just role play a producer who would make stuff. It's kind of a weird way to say it, but that's honestly the best I've done things, is when I've just been like, what would I do if I was doing a for and things happen all of a sudden. And like, because I have an easy time helping other people. When other people come to me with their goals and they say, I want to do this, I got this, what can I do? That's easy for me. But like, I can't do it because there's so many goals, there's so many things. The second you just pick a thing. So whatever way you can do to pick things, and just inventing fake stuff is a good way to do it, because hey, maybe it won't be fake pretty soon. Kick snare phase alignment only really relevant with bass frequencies, constants relationship higher up. Just in terms of a dope rhythmic sense, yes. Like when I have started to deal with hardware, I have learned that timing is a difficult thing. Not all moments are created equal in terms of when you hit a note and stuff happens. And even when you record stuff, you discover that stuff just does not happen on the beat. And if it happens the same way at the same time, it's not going to sound off time, but it also won't sound aligned. It won't really get that cut, like dead mouse level doing. So that's why like elements that are not kicks and snares need to be sort of aligned like outside of that and with them. But also it helps for the kicks and snares if other stuff isn't, because again, remember the whole thing about the flat EQ curve and the snap, and if there's stuff in the way of it, by way of either you've adjusted an EQ or you're literally mixing it with things, how they mix with things will affect the of it, which is why changing them tends to help. Because if it does make an alteration to the snap and you want to return the snap, you explain sound alignment and masking problems such as kick and bass alignment and frequency masking issues. Sure. So dynamic EQing, dynamic like de-essaying essentially is what that falls under. And it's very valuable in lots of ways. I don't really use dynamic EQing much, but it is a very smart way to handle certain issues. I tend to solve it through the kite flying, by the way of attempting to make sure my generation does not do that. And it is only so effective that way. Like, it's a bit like how people who record guitars, the old kind of professional, not even that old, I don't say currently professional, like master engineer way of doing it is not to EQ your guitar recording ever, but to only change the angle of the microphone, which is kite flying your generation to make it not do whatever problem it's doing. That's technically the best solution. If you can do that without adjusting the EQ, you will have a better phase performance. But chances are, unless you, and this is again the layering benefit, if you do layering, it's easier to do that because you've isolated your stuff and you have more than one kite going. So that means that like you can change the thing around without screwing with your other kites. I like this kite metaphor. Studio drummer, superior drummer. What's the delta comparison? Superior drummer is astoundingly more complicated. It is like a drum engine. It is honestly coming very close to being like AI driven player. It's seriously like that. It's far and away, and also like the count of sample depth is nuts. Studio drummer is really good, but just the core pack, Superior Drummer 3 pack, is like 300 gigs. It's insane how much, and how deep. It's just. And considering, I mean, I've spent more money on East-West stuff before, and Superior Drummer, by comparison, being at that level of competency, isn't that expensive. Am I doing anything cool with Vital these days? I haven't used it in like a song yet, but every time I've tried anything with it, it's done really, really neat stuff. I delved into it a little with the string synthesis stuff when I was doing like for Citrus, but I was having a hard time reconciling certain things about controlling for all my way of doing it. And I was realizing when I was telling you guys about the pitch thing that was one of the big problems, was that I couldn't work with phase the way I was used to, but I actually can if I actually just work with the pitch. So we'll find out about that. I mentioned phase and phase randomness. Good way to go about correcting or keeping an eye on this. Generative control, either making sure it's something that you're in control of or like rendering it and moving it manually. Certain plugins like to begin with randomness on, and I'm just not a big fan of that. Like FM8, like you have to tell it to not be random, and it makes it really hard to do really deep work. Unless you turn it off, and you turn it off, that's fine. If I listen to classical music, favorite composer, Vivaldi, all the way up and down. Four Seasons is just never not good. Damn, all of it, like the whole damn thing. After that, it's like pretty standard. Like I like Beethoven stuff. It's like heavy metal, you know. I like Liszt stuff and like Rachmaninoff too, but I have, you know, density, right? Where do I get my musical inspiration from? Well, a lot of the things that here's a pretty big one, a good example. I was talking before about how I like to make music for stuff. I began originally coming out thinking about doing film scoring, but I also had a real desire for scoring games, and it's because of Descent, Interplay, Parallax, Old School Volition. These guys, this game, the first one was a very kind of MIDI weirdy deal, but the second game had actual CD audio in it and some really kick-ass like industrial stuff and a little bit of fun neuro sound design that if you go and listen to what's on that ELST and like the game's actual soundtrack, like for menus and intros and shit, Like, it's actually kind of neat. That inspired the hell out of me for a long time. And after that, it's just games and movies. Every single game or movie that had a soundtrack that kicked ass moved me into wanting to care about it. Half-Life 2, The Matrix, everything John Williams has ever done, anything Hans Zimmer has ever done. Like, it becomes about how well stuff can integrate into whatever content it's in. Because if you just listen to a lot of that music by itself, it's fun. And especially the Descent 2 CD stuff was actually straight up like album music from these artists. It wasn't made for the game. They just took the lyrics out. And that, like, that's why I write stuff the way I do. Questions are running out. I'm answering questions too fast. Come on, guys. Come on, questions. I could actually do some kind of impromptu sound design if we want to have some fun with that. Favorite Russian DNB producer. Wow, I don't have a lot of names, but like I've been listening to that Neuropunk podcast a lot. Like everything on there is awesome. Process to creating a track. So starting with the drop usually, but that's just a different way of saying starting with the point. Because sometimes the point isn't the drop. Sometimes it's I have something that I want to express or I have some element or thing to do. So like this track, for example, I got pretty far in the creation process before I finally figured out that the point was this actual thing. And once I knew that, it made working on it a lot easier. But if I had known that at the beginning, that would just been the point the whole time. Other tracks where I have really nailed like the point would be like Truck Puncher, an electro track, because I had a specific interest in nailing an intro. It's also one of the weirder designed ones. It's not evenly timed like normally 16 bars. It's 12 bars. And I was modeling after some other electro track I had seen at the time. And then I had to merge the point because I had like this kind of vague drop 4-bar concept going on. But like I didn't go farther than that because I knew that I needed to make it into an intro. And then it just became about headbanging. Wow, excuse me. Headbanging is an incredible tool. You saw me doing it while I was listening to this song and like letting yourself groove, because here's something you can tell really easily when something violates the groove. And what you want to do is go in it and you want to just stop the thing that like hit you, figure out what got it, and then put it somewhere where it doesn't violate the groove or somewhere where it helps the groove. That's what you want to be listening to. You want to like, that's whatever your point is. Your point has a groove, and usually repetition of it means having a groove of a way, and then other things need to like, so then it's just building on building on building with this groove sensation so that you can just like create a track that reads. Ideally, in the midst of doing this, you'll end up getting a vision for what the whole thing is, and you'll just do that. But if you don't, you can just keep building, and then eventually you'll end up doing the whole sculpting thing. What do I think about Phaseplant? Oh boy. So Phaseplant is slightly more complicated than Vital, but Vital is a little bit more like efficient in terms of its power. I'll show you actually, because I like both of these plugins. And they're the most powerful sound design tools I've seen that aren't FL tools. Oops. Get back. Nope. Yep. Where is Vital? Where you at? There you are. Oh my god, my window's huge. Okay, well, this is fine. So, Phaseplant's whole mentionedness, the reason it matters, is that it allows you to do a lot of hardware-based sort of action. Like, you can modulate stuff on stuff, but also do it to itself, and self-modulate and that kind of thing. This is nuts. And the things that you can do in here far and away outstrip the stuff you could do inside Vital, but only because it doesn't actually let you go as far as you could if you had hardware, which is a no duh. It's a power problem and a process problem. The harder and denser a thing is like that, the higher the frequencies are generated power-wise, and the harder that anti-aliasing becomes. So that's why like plugin devs try really hard to make their chains work that into the mass, but therefore not be that dense. And a lot of this, like if I just modulated FM by a waveform, is not anywhere near the impact it would be if I were doing it to like an actual piece of hardware. And this reality, it's not bad. Like it's still dope. It's still way better than just not having an ability to modulate stuff at audio rate, which is the whole thing that matters. But it is still not quite as high as actual hardware. But Vital, though, meanwhile, can still do a lot of these things, and including a couple real specific, real clever stuff that the other dude can't, but still not as much. It can't, you can't just keep adding filters and more oscillators. It's just these, but this is enough most of the time. If you are aware of how the things work. The Swiss Army knifing kind of deal works out if you like have a real specific idea and intention to use the tools. But like this kind of thing is more like just an empty like whiteboard. You can draw whatever, do whatever. It doesn't need to be efficient. It doesn't need to be good, but it'll definitely come out somewhere. And then later, if you figure out exactly how and why it did what, you could probably work out to that sound with that amount of control with just an oscillator or two of this. Because this still has all the same core elements. Like it has a sampler, it has wavetables. It even has use and index mapping of stuff, which is something that Phaseplant doesn't have as much of. But Phaseplant has poly effects and poly modulation and that kind of thing. This also has poly modulation, but in different and interesting applications, like including stereo spreading of modulation timing on everything. It's very, very cool. On and up to and including that the modulations themselves are audio rate. That like this, you could just turn on sync and then turn it up to key track. You need to sync, be whatever. You turn on the key track is what I meant, and then this minus 12. It's literally just already one octave below the note value, and it doesn't have a restriction on the note value. It moves really, really fast. And you could define your own shapes and that kind of thing, and that's essentially audio rate like FMing. This becomes LFOs into becoming just OSCs, and that means that in some not all parameters are equal in terms of what it can attach to, but filters wise, which you can't see because my UI is too big. Filters wise, it's fast enough, and it's at like what the hardware level of fast is in terms of actually whipping around high resonance filter effects. So that's something that Vital can do that's really sweet. Meanwhile, Phaseplant is sort of like the generalized version of that, but that's just very two different interesting directions of things that personally I think Phaseplant is more valuable if you actually don't know any of that stuff I just said. If you have no idea how to actually utilize the stuff, this is amazing for experimentation. It's also amazing for going places that make no sense. But Vital is very like, it's kind of like what Razor is. Only way better, like not in terms of effective capability, but in terms of like being efficient and very smart about utilizing the technology and actually coaxing it into like more usable things by default. That's kind of how I see those two plugins. Have I ever made a song using only 3x OSC and similar restrictive challenges? Yeah, like 15 years ago, I think. Wow, a long time ago. Yeah, about like that. Like around when I first started, I did a few things like that. They sound really bad. I have done stuff like I tried to synthesize entire drum kits out of just Citrus. Cymbals are really hard, as it turns out. Thousands of voices ain't nothing. But other than that, I did a whole thing with Citrus one time. That was, or not Citrus, Serum, a whole song on a Serum. Didn't actually finish it, but I did get pretty far with it. It's a very capable plugin. I've been trying to think recently about the nature of limitations and how to come up with doing stuff like that, because especially with what I just described about what Vital can do, one instance of Vital just inside it, not even in a DAW, has more power than most versions of FL Studio have had during its lifetime of existing. It's not really a reasonable like limitation to be like, yeah, use only Vital. It's like, yeah, use only the universe. And that, like, so then you start being like, well, what about 3x OSC? And it's sort of like, yeah, well, I mean, I could just have all the sine waves, and it's a sampler, so what good is that, really? You can even do really cool things with it with sampling, because it can oscillate the sampler. But that, like, yeah, like, those limitations do come up with some neat things, but I tend not to finish them into actual full songs, because eventually you start to learn why people don't do that. Like, why, like, for example, I'm learning all this stuff about string synthesis, and my learning of it is mostly that, like, because the samplers are always going to be better. And it's true that I can get really, really far, but I'm only just going to get so far as to be like 80% of the way there, pretty much most of the time. So the effort diminishes pretty quick. Mentioned rhythmic sidechaining. So sidechaining is not just for bass and kicks. It's for whatever needs the power. Like its sort of original incarnation in use was for ducking voices. Like a DJ talking over a DJ mix would have a sidechain on so that he didn't have to ride the fader and could just talk, and it would immediately snap back to being the right level and he didn't have to worry about it. Yeah, you know. When I did metal a lot, I would actually use sidechaining as the primary method of mixing, and I would sidechain everything into everything. I would break up everything into 5 bands, and then I would sidechain the power of the bands into the thing that conflicted with it. So, for example, the drums low part would go into the low part of the bass, and the drums mid part would go into the mid part of the guitar, because it's the snare and the guitar's interaction. The drums high part would be sidechained by the vocals, like that kind of thing. And then you figure out your tessellation and how you want that to go together, and that's what that's for. And that could be everything. It's just that for the stuff that we're doing, that makes things too clean. That's a level of requirement. Like if you were to push, I would have to push my track like 5 times harder, and it would just bring it back to sounding like this. Like that's what that would do. And that big tech is not. It's not to make a thing sound the kind of like 70s squish, right? But like metal that doesn't sound like that. That actually does sound like a solid, clean, transparent wall of a thing happening. That needs that work to sound even that loud, and it's not even loud enough, is it? So that's sort of why I don't go that hard all the time. But in an event like this track has a unique kind of thing, which is that there's this like column of 16th note kind of hit just always on, which a little bit like a trance track or an electro track where the kick is always on the beat. That means there's a certain timed reality of level requirement that's always going to be there. And if you can adjust for that, then you get your easy tessellation. Can I tell us about spectral morphing? So actually, there's an interesting ability in a lot of plugins where you see a filter that's not just the filter type, but also a filter morph, where it'll morph between like a low pass, a band pass, and a high pass. And you might think, well, why don't I just do something like pick a band pass and just scrape up and down? And the answer to that is the phase change. Moving phase while a thing is playing changes its pitch, and a filter is phase change. So if you move a filter a long way, that's a big deal. But if you move the filter a little and then crossfade into another filter that moves a little and then crossfade into another filter that moves a little, that sounds way cleaner and does the same thing. It creates the dark, high-low kind of framed kind of experience. And then everything I'm talking about works very straight up into being a wavetable. Like I'm describing the invention of a wavetable. And that's what spectral morphing is. It's like we use that to do all of that. Like that's what all that breaks out into. But that's its value, though, is using volume automation over filters. And what you can do, and wavetabling is the solving for N for this, where because we're using frames, we're able to do very complicated filter-esque modulation, but without the damage that filters do. Sometimes you want that damage, though, but not all of it. So that's filter morphing, where you do the little bit of motion, so you do hear a little, but it's, and filters tend to have a filter mode for that, to do that. Do you think advanced music theory knowledge is needed with the thing we're doing? No, I don't. This is actually a fun discussion because everything about music theory was designed for a very old world. It was designed for a world without like electrical representation of music at all. In order to, us going to a store to buy music or us going to Spotify to find something was the old world equivalent of going to get sheet music to come home and play on your dank harpsichord. Like that was what music theory was for. And it was not even about training you. It wasn't about a person's ability to be a musician. It was all about translating the intent of the composer. The music theory is simplified music. It is absolutely bare bones simplification so that a composer can come up as though they limited to themselves. They're just like they limited themselves to 3x oscillators so that when they gave you the FLP, they didn't have to give you 10 billion samples or an orchestra, so that you got the code of the notes that are only so many ways that when you see them, you can play them and you know for sure that that's what the composer meant. That, and it wouldn't be all that crazy and amazing, because if it was, it couldn't be represented by music theory. Like none of the crap that we're doing can. If you think about that, I thought about that the instant I tried to apply to Berklee College of Music and they wanted me to give them sheet music for compositions I had made. What? Like, I can't break down a neuro bass into notes. What? And it's because neither then could back then they translate crazy complicated actual virtuoso musicianship. They had to come up with an even denser sense of stuff for that, but even that wasn't still not complicated enough. That in the sense of like a composer could absolutely themselves outclass their own work. It was a tremendous limitation to have to translate it into human players. It's why conservatories are freaking armies, why they train you like armies, because it's their job to turn you into a machine. Music theory is essentially programming to make you the DAW so that the composer can play you. That's like they send you the FLP sheet music and you come out with a project. You render it in real time. That's what that's about, which is not super duper relevant to like how we roll now is all. Best tips to approach sound design. The layering idea is something I really want y'all to walk away with, because it does the kite flying is a very like, I generate something, distort it through a million things, and it comes out this mastery, and I just chop it up and order it, and that's the end of the day. Like, awesome. That's a lot of fun. But you can do that when you have the understanding to know what every step of what you're doing is going to do, so that you can make the necessary adjustments. Because you get really far down the line and you realize that it's out of control, but do you realize why? Can you fix it? Can you make it still be it without adjusting it? And like, some people can, but most can't. So the danger is, that's the danger. So then the solution is the layering, and now you end up learning some fun stuff about the nature of sounds, like why things sound the way they do. Like if you ever try to recreate real stuff and you find that you can kind of mimic it by layering other weirdnesses, like Foley work essentially. But now imagine you're doing Foley work, but like for like a synthesized sound. It becomes very literal. Like you hear a sound and you go, oh, this is noisy, scratchy thing, and then this kind of saw wavy thing, and then like a little bit of wah in the middle. And literally, if you hear a thing like you just describe like that, and you just make those elements happen, and your recorder's like going wah, and you pitch it down, watch it sound just like the thing you wanted. And yeah, it could sound better. It could be like you can use the vocoding to kind of spice it up and whatnot. But what you get out of that from the sound design approach is that a lot of stuff can be built out of a lot of simple things. So you want to be on the lookout for how to do the simple things, because what you want is a compendium in your mind of what the simple things do. Like what I've just learned about doing visual effects, I'm learning how to use ZGE, and I just kind of recently figured out how to do fire effects. Like just make a thing look like it has a flame. And it's a collection of really simple stuff. And it's because I have utilized the simple stuff in certain ways that I have a memory of it being like, hey, wait a minute. If I do this with that, that's going to do with that. And it's exactly how the sound design works. I just am familiar enough with like what a phaser sounds like, what kinds of FM sound like on certain types of sources, what kinds of crushed distortion sounds like on certain kinds of sources, that when I hear a sound come up, I can be like, not so much how that sound was made, but like, that sounds like if I did and then yes. So that's been my approach to doing things. And in the beginning, it was really hard because you don't have the compendium, and you solve that by doing like the sound design version of interval training, which is you just do stuff. You do the basic stuff. You don't do the things you thought you didn't want to do because it was so basic that you were embarrassed for doing it. Do them all. Do them all. And we're just about almost done for today. Get your questions in. Sound design. Word. I hope you guys liked it today. I had a lot of fun doing the stream for drum and bass. I'm very happy that the song is coming along, that I actually have something to talk about. It's pretty cool. I pretty much found this and started working on it and made it better because I was doing this stream. I had to find something that worked, and I found this track, and a lot of this crap I just said that I learned, I figured out in the last like month. So it's been great. Yay. Good job, everybody. Good job, people putting this on. More drum and bass in the world. It needs to be there. The world's not heavy enough. I don't actually see the chat because it breaks things if I have the stream on. I have Andre reporting to me with your questions. Also, someone's like proposition. How would I approach neuro sound design? All right, so neuro is the study of being so complicated that your individual sounds have so much detail that a person can't see them all. That there's so like my lovely comparison to this is Tool album cover art. The band Tool. Look up their album covers. You've probably seen art like this before. This is the visual version of what I'm talking about, where you can't see all of the detail. You're either too far away to see the small bits, or you're too close to see the big bits. That's what neuro sound design is, but for audio. You have to approach it similarly. You have to put things in so many different directions, and just in panning, pitch, rhythm sometimes. A lot of the coolest Skrillex spaces is kind of that came up recently, were not even individual sounds, but like a sound where it was like a sound and then a sound and then a sound that made it sound like one sound. Like that's neuro sound design, where there is actually enough identifiable individual things happening that you cannot keep it all in your head. But doing that for every individual element in the song and somehow mixing it together in a way that's audible, that's the challenge and the majesty of it when it works. Yeah. I'm glad y'all like it. I'm glad it's working. I'm having a really good time today. Who's on next? I think ARTFX is next. He does some Krill stuff. That'll be pretty sweet. I might hang around for that, actually. I caught the tail end of Let's Synthesize, which I thought was a fun name for stuff to have. Because let's synthesize. Let's do that. I would synthesize everything if I could. I will one day figure out symbols. I know that there's O-gun, but I kind of don't want to use it. That feels like cheating. But yeah, STRANJAH is next. I guess that's how you pronounce his name. I would assume that would be what I imagine is the point of that name. Yeah. Oh, you know something? What I actually, I don't have the visualizer. Shit. So what I was just saying was I was using DGE for stuff, and I actually made a visualizing intro for this that was actually just the FL's playback. I had messed with it. You can't do that live, but you can do it through a recording. So I recorded the playback of the song like I normally do, and I put it into here, and I did a bunch of neat effects with it. But I really like DGE. Like, especially it has particle systems in it. This is the dopest thing, and I never want to not mess with this. Anyway, what do I think about linear phase mod and filter after effect? FL did great with the linear phase EQ thing. It's great enough that I have learned some things about the nature of it and timing and buffering in general. Like, oh boy, we're almost done, but here's something. We're talking about timing and things, and there's plug-in delay compensation for stuff, and that's all good. But here's something. When you bust stuff together and into it out of mixer inserts, that becomes a collapsed audio stream, which means that stuff that happened in it, like, can't be adjusted in time again. So when it gets delayed because of something like linear phase EQ, if you have, for example, your sidechain happening before that, so that the carve comes out of it, the carve gets delayed with it. And it can't not be delayed correctly. Like, it can't be delayed correctly because the whole stream is being delayed. It'll always be wrong. And that it becomes a problem. So what you have to do is you have to either bounce a lot of stuff when you do linear phase things, which is absolutely just what you need to do because it literally delays the stream. Like, if you just put like one of these on, like a limiter on, and put the delay, like the attack on, because that's a literal delay, but without plug-in delay compensation. So what you do is you need to put linear phase EQ on stuff that's either after all of the motion or record the things that move with it, which is to say buses and like the master channel. Those are the things that use the linear phase the most. I'm not using it at all on this channel, this track, because it's so old. I have lived without it for so long that I barely, like, a lot of my solutions involve understanding how to mitigate the issues of minimum phase. So it's interesting now to live and have options to not have to deal with that. Anyway, we're almost done with today. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to DNB Academy, and check up next is the STRANJAH, who's doing more streaming for more drum and bass. Anybody question about this? Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day. I forgot where I was in my spiel. Yes, but as usual, have a nice day. I'm like 2 minutes early, but I guess this is fine. It's gonna take me this long to figure out where the off button is on my XSplit. Check out my Discord. I have a Discord. Yeah, but yeah, you guys have good times. See y'all later.